Hi, this is Geoff Berry, and welcome to the Nature Calling channel, where we aim to deepen connection to the earth and to the spirit of life and to all our kin on this beautiful planet. For followers of the Nature Calling conversation series, I'd love to welcome along John Seed. And I've got to say, much respect. You have been very, very active in terms of protecting the environment, taking care of Earth, taking care of country. Well, in Australia, from what I know, I'm sure you've done plenty of work overseas as well. But thanks a lot for having a chat with me, John.
Thank you, Geoff.
Yeah, it's great. So as I mentioned in my email inviting you in for a chat, that I did first come across your work through the Rainforest Information Centre, through protecting rainforests. I actually didn't realise at the time, because that was when you were you were up in the Daintree, and I didn't realise that it all started in New South Wales. So what started you off? I'd love to know what first inspired you to become a rainforest defender.
Yeah, well, it was a bit kind of mysterious, really. I was living in a community called Bodie Farm that we'd started in 1975 in northern New South Wales, on the ridge between Tuntable Creek and Terania Creek. And we'd built a meditation centre in the forest. We were building our own houses, delivering our own babies, growing our own food. And I thought I was going to spend my life doing that, when suddenly in August of 1979, I somehow found myself as part of what years later we realised was the first direct action in defence of rainforests, not only in Australia but anywhere in the world. Some neighbours had appealed for help, saying that the Forestry Commission was coming in the next day to log the rainforest at the end of Terania Creek Road, and we had to stop them. And I didn't know there was rainforest in Australia. I didn't know what a rainforest was. I'd never been to the end of Terania Creek Road, though it was only like 6 or 7K from where we'd been living. But the neighbours had asked for help, and so I showed up. And something very profound happened to me there that I can't really describe, but it turned my life around, and that was that.
Something that had to do with maybe feeling love and connection for place?
Well, I mean, I guess if I had to put it into words, the closest I could get was that I heard the trees calling out to me, and they knew my name. You know, like they had a connection. There was a connection there that I hadn't experienced before, and it was authentic and undeniable, and it changed everything.
Has it been something that's been with you ever since?
Well, certainly the passion that it inspired has been with me ever since. I can't say that I wander around feeling connected at all times or anything like that, but it certainly opened me to the possibility that a connection like that can change a person. And it seems to me that it's the kind of change that would be required en masse in order for us to stop this slide to oblivion that we're on as a species. And so it's something that interests me greatly.
Yeah, and thanks for obviously the reality check that sometimes these things come and go, but I sense that and from what I've seen working with people in ecotherapy, that you can have very profound and long-lasting knock-on effects from one experience.
Well, for me, it's more like it's the same as psychedelics, in that it's not like you carry that experience around with you, but once you've known it, you know it's possible. Like you never forget that it's possible, regardless of where you might be at any particular time. And therefore, that was part of what inspired me to, when I happened upon the philosophy of deep ecology, it inspired me to heed Arne Naess's call, he said that in order to dispel the illusion of separation between human beings and the rest of the natural world, what was needed were community therapies to heal our relations with the earth.
Yeah.
And so, having had the experience of being healed, even if only for moments at a time, that inspired me to continue to work to try to create such therapies and indeed to discover them. And, especially with, working with my teacher, Joanna Macy, we've found many things that will allow participants in our experiential deep ecology workshops, what Joanna now calls the work that reconnects, to allow all the participants to experience that healing, even if just for a moment. And as the facilitator of these workshops, I'm also a participant, and that means that I have a regular way in which I can find my way back to that sense of experiencing my rootedness in the living earth, as a reality. I have a way of finding my way there on a regular basis.
Yeah, great. And I mean, already just in that little patch, you've opened up so many fruitful possibilities for us to continue to talk about. But I would like to just pop back to one little thing. Before you had that initial experience, you'd mentioned you were helping set up the Bodhi something.
Bodhi farm.
Bodhi farm. So you're obviously already working with a meditation practice at that time, and I've really noticed how awareness practices in nature can really open us up to our connection, to our deep connection.
Yeah, I'm sure that 5 years earlier, I was a systems engineer for IBM in London, and I'm sure that had that person been at the end of Terania Creek Road without the 5 years of meditation in between, something very different would have taken place.
Yeah, something had already worked your psyche into that openness, sort of slowing down the mind, opening up to that animism that's all around us.
That's right. And even though the Buddhism that I had studied in India and Nepal and that I was practicing at the time didn't really pay that much attention to the natural world per se, later I discovered engaged Buddhism and whole lineages of teachers who totally fitted in with, what I had experienced, and many of whom would invite me to teach. Like I was invited to do an article for the Vipassana magazine, Inquiring Mind, in America, and I replied saying, "Look, I'm terribly sorry, but I don't really think I'm a Buddhist anymore." And they said, "Of course you're a Buddhist," So it was like the Buddhists weren't ready to give me up just because I'd stopped meditating and I was, trying to save the forest instead.
Great. Well, I hope that there's that space. I feel like the space that I work in, my practice is Zen, which, again, it doesn't talk specifically about earth connection and things, but it opens you up to it really, really well. And my Zen teachers have worked with Aboriginal elders and seen the space between. And I feel like there is a really fruitful space that's in between. Well, let's say we're both using Buddhism, but an awareness meditation practice, the indigenous wisdom, which I'd love to come around to and find out what you might have learnt from Aboriginal elders, and our own depth psychology, our own myths and symbols and whatever it is we bring to the game. We're part of that as well. Our own ancestral lineages were linked to the earth before we were colonized over the processes. So you're still teaching, you're still part of workshops.
Well, I had some serious health issues that brought me to the brink of death on several occasions, so that for about 5 years, until quite recently, my focus narrowed to staying alive.
Surviving.
But it appears that I may have succeeded in staying alive. And now my enthusiasms are slowly kind of, wave upon wave. They're moving up the beach, so I'm not quite sure where it's going to end. But at the moment, I'm feeling super inspired and organising workshops and also back to rainforest activism.
That's just so good to hear. Well, for a start, I'm glad you're alive, and we've got you on the incoming tide. But you've probably opened up a question I wanted to come to at some stage, so we might as well jump straight to it. I mentioned I've been an environmental activist for decades, and I've really struggled over the last few years, and I feel I am shifting my attention towards things like, just working in ecotherapy and grief work and so forth. Not necessarily, that big of a difference. But I remember somewhere I read someone had asked you the question, what do you do when you get down? When environmental activism fails, like I mentioned around where I live on the south coast at the moment, there's a lot of development going up, which means a lot of trees going down. And your answer at that time was, I just remember that I'm the part of the rainforest that's aware of protecting itself. Am I quoting that about right? And where are you at?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I may have said that, but my own recollection is that statement that the realization that it's not me, John Seed, protecting the rainforest, but that it's me, John Seed, having been grabbed by the rainforest, so that I remembered that for 100 million years, my genetic material had been evolving within this rainforest and only recently stepped out onto the savannah, etc. And so that it was the rainforest acting in its own defense rather than me acting, and so that was kind of, but in terms of what I do when I feel the despair and the horror and of what I see going down, what happening to the world, I feel like the teaching that I received from Joanna Macy from the workshop that I did with her in 1986, which was then called Despair and Empowerment, and which she now calls Honouring Our Pain for the World, that's become, my go-to ever since, because it doesn't matter how down I feel, it doesn't matter how deep my grief or my rage or my terror is. In fact, the deeper the better. What she taught me was that if we can get together with a group of people and create a safe container that invites the expression of those feelings, and there's certain rituals and ceremonies that we've developed that allow that far from being crushed by those feelings in the way that we fear, that we've been taught to fear those feelings, that far from being crushed, we're amazingly renewed and invigorated and empowered. And so by facilitating that, of course, I get to be part of those circles on a regular basis. For the 5 years where I was absent from the scene, it was much more difficult, and I don't have any way that I can do that alone by myself, personally, without a community, other than meditation. And so I got back into meditation and into just recognizing that these are just feelings, that feelings come and feelings go, and just watching the feelings come and go. But I must say it was a great relief when I was able to experience that upliftment that comes from sharing our deepest misgivings and our deepest fears with each other.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm hearing you there. I'm feeling that. I've run a couple of grief rituals around here. We had the bushfires on our doorstep, New Year's 2020. So I managed to fit an action in. I guess a community therapy was a phrase you used earlier, just before COVID pretty much shut us down. So I'm glad I got to do that. And actually, recently I got to sit in a grief ritual with Joanna Macy, which was great. And what it reminded me of too was the absolute simplicity. These are not complex, difficult things to do, right? We just have to make the time, and as you say, and hopefully get a small community, get some people together. And so refreshing, so liberating to just admit how we really feel, to get down to that reality of what it's all about.
I'm not sure how Joanna introduced that when you did it, but the piece of it that seems to me to be the most important in the context of activism, especially, and what are we to do, is that these feelings are an important part of our intelligence. That if we look back at our human and pre-human history, then one thing that we have to recognise is that we're descended from an incredible pedigree of survivors, that without exception, every single one of our ancestors for 4.5 billion years has had the intelligence to be able to somehow reach the age of being able to reproduce itself without being consumed, while millions didn't have that good fortune, but without exception, every one of our ancestors did so. And until very recently, when we grew this big bulge over our nose, there was no cognition involved in that intelligence. That intelligence was what we now call feelings. You can call it intuition, you can call it instinct. It doesn't matter what you call it, but what we call feelings is what remains of that very ancient intelligence. So I'm not wanting to disparage cognition. It's very beautiful and very useful, but you couldn't say that it stood the test of time in the way that these feelings have. And the actual outcome of that cognition remains to be seen and hangs in the balance.
Sure.
And so one of the problems with thinking intelligence is that it doesn't move us. We can know what's going on, and that doesn't change anything unless we can enlist those passions which allowed our ancestors to survive unimaginable challenges and difficulties and dangers. Unless we can allow that passion back into our lives, the thinking is not going to help us. And it's that we relearn by engaging in these rituals.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, just to go back to a philosophical perspective or a part of cognition, you mentioned Arne Naess's Deep Ecology, and I think the idea of dispelling the illusion of separation is something that's really grown. Like I feel like a lot of people are aware of that now, that we are a part of nature and we've become separated from it, and that is a problem. I'm finding that little narrative has really taken hold, and I find a lot of people nodding and coming along for the ride to that point. Yes, we've got to overcome that separation.
But what Naess said also was that because this illusion of separation is so deeply lodged in our psyche and in every institution of the society, due to the anthropocentrism or human-centeredness that gives rise to it, we're not going to be able to think our way out of the mess. Yeah. Famously, he said that ecological ideas won't save us, that what's needed is ecological identity, ecological self. Yeah. And so that's more complicated than merely knowing that. So merely to know that the sense of separation is an illusion isn't as powerful as, for example, actually taking the challenge of holding your breath for 10 minutes while you think about it, And, of course, you can't succeed at that, but the longer that you attempt to reach 10 minutes holding your breath while thinking about, is that sense of separation between me and the environment, as if such a thing could exist, Is that sense of separation real, or is it an illusion? That experience is much, much more powerful than merely like nodding our heads and knowing that it's true.
And and you've talked about the experiences, and again, I want to come back to that phrase you used, community therapies. And and again, I see this all the time in ecotherapy, a circle of people in in nature having an experience, like doing some awareness exercises and really dropping in. I like to guide people on deep listening. Just stop the human mind for a bit and just feel your way down into this place and see what happens. I try really hard to not direct anything, just let people feel how that feels. And the outcomes are astounding.
Yeah.
Really, really, I see people coming to tears of realization in a short amount of time, really profoundly moved. It reminds me that, again, all these things are not that difficult, right? We've just got to get something out of the way and commit some time and place to actually experiencing what is innate within us, as you say, pretty much genetically predetermined to feel those things.
But I agree. And I think the reason why it's actually really simple is that something that I again learned from Joanna Macy when I wrote to her a few years after we'd created the Council of All Beings together. And I said to her, I've been exploring different ideas for community therapies for healing the illusion of separation. And I'm bothered by the fact that everything that I try seems to work. And
Yeah.
how can that be? And she said, well, that's because once a group of people gets together with the shared intention of healing that illusion of separation, it hardly matters what you do after that, that it's that intention
Right.
that and the community that does the work. It's like if there's a separation, it's the earth didn't ever push us away. If there's a separation, it's our doing.
Mm.
And the moment that we make a gesture of reconciliation, the earth comes rushing back in.
Mm. I'm hearing you. Actually, you've really validated something for me there, because I've felt a little bit of that. I've been coming up with my own little practices and exercises for people and thinking, wow, that worked. Or that worked in that way. That worked in that way. That would have been better in this way. But yeah, rarely have I ever actually tried something and said that didn't work at all. There is definitely a magic to it that is built in. Well, there you go. Well, you've answered it already. But while answering it, you've mentioned something there. Another thing I came across of your work that I've worked with and adapted a little bit was the Cosmic Walk, and you've mentioned the Council of All Beings. Can we just have a few words on those kinds of practices that you've used over the years?
Well, the Council of All Beings was the first experiential deep ecology workshop where Joanna Macy's work with feelings, despair and empowerment was brought together with Arne Naess's call for community therapies and the philosophy of deep ecology. Mm. And the Council of All Beings is we get together and with a ceremony, we find an ally from the non-human world, and then we make a mask to represent that ally, and then we gather in council. We walk through a ritual gate and gather in council and allow the voice of our ally to speak through us. It's not necessary to believe anything. You don't have to believe that this really is the voice of mycorrhizae speaking through me. All you have to do is let go of all that and join in the conversation, and it's guaranteed that you'll hear things that you've never heard before. Yeah. They will be authentic, and some of them will come out of your mouth. And then the meaning of it is neither here nor there. There can be differences of opinion about that. Yeah. But the fact that something profound takes place every time is, beyond dispute.
Yeah, and the experience is hearing the other voices, the more than human voices of nature. You're just opening up and hearing them. As you say, you don't have to believe. You're not quite sure what's going to happen, but there are other voices in nature. There are other people, as some Indigenous people say, and you're just hearing those voices. What an opening!
Yeah, and the Cosmic Walk, early on, when I discovered that every Indigenous society that still had its ceremonies intact, included regular ceremonies that allowed the human community to acknowledge and honour and revere the rest of the earth community, all our relations, including, to my shock, I saw a Council of All Beings being performed by a group of Hopi Indigenous in the southwest deserts of the United States. And I thought Joanna and I had invented it 2 years earlier, and they said they'd been doing it for 10,000 years, you know, so that this is everywhere. So early on, I would borrow some of their practices only to discover that this wasn't generally welcomed, you know. They felt that everything else had been stolen and now we were stealing their spiritual practices. And so I stopped doing that and looked to modern practices that we would create ourselves, like the Council of All Beings was one such. And one of those was influenced by the work of Thomas Berry. Father Thomas Berry was perhaps the most prominent progressive Catholic theologian of the 20th century. And according to Thomas, the creation myth that underpins us is very significant, and that there are 10,000 glorious creation myths that have been created by the different cultures of the earth, but that as beautiful as they are, they're often at war with each other, that the creation myth of the Christians is at war with the creation myth of Islam, and the creation myth of the Catholics versus the Protestants. It's just like he said that it's too late for all of that, and what's needed now is the creation myth that's going to unite us rather than separate us. Yeah. And he proposed that, correctly told, the story revealed by empiricism or the scientific method was the front runner, in his opinion, as to, you know, that creation myth. But properly told meant that we couldn't leave it to the scientists to tell the story, that they didn't understand the sense, or they didn't necessarily understand the sense of awe and wonder that needed to accompany the story in order for it to serve as a creation myth. And so he called upon the poets and musicians and artists to tell the story, and many have responded. And one of those was a colleague of his, perhaps a disciple, I'm not sure how she'd describe herself, Sister Miriam Therese McGillis, a Catholic nun from a community in New Jersey called Genesis Farm, and she created a ceremony called the Cosmic Walk in response to Thomas's call. And neither Thomas nor Sister Miriam were involved with Deep Ecology at that point, but both of them, Thomas is dead now, but I had the opportunity to do a Council of All Beings involving Thomas while he was alive, and I've done the Cosmic Walk at Genesis Farm with Sister Miriam since, and both of them can see the continuity between his work and the work of Deep Ecology. And so in the Cosmic Walk, we travel from the great flaring forth, as Thomas called it, the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years, through all of the incredible moments of the universe coming into being up to the present moment. But we do so not in the sense of that this is describing the universe within which we live, but rather this is describing the universe that we are that moment when the universe has become, in the human, has developed the ability to look around, look over its shoulder, and the universe's jaw drops in awe and wonder, staggered by the revelation of the path that it's trodden to get here.
Yeah.
And when we do this as a ceremony, it kind of it speaks very clearly to our ecological identity rather than our merely social identity, and nourishes that ecological identity.
Very much. Another thing I've found too that's embeds, I guess, teachings into our psyche a little better is even beyond the story, which is my background. I love the myths and the stories, and I consider evolution a great myth in the terms of a great story that reconnects us to this cosmic spirit of life as it's manifest here and now. But another thing I've really found is that movement, storytelling with movement can really help. So what I did, actually, I came across the cosmic walk through someone I know you're aware of as well, which is Glennis of the Pagayan cosmology. And I was really taken by it. I've done it a few times. I haven't done it at her moon court, I'd have to say. But I put it together with animal movement. So when I tell it, I kind of ritualize it and into a way that gets people to actually move as the part of evolution that we're going through. So it's more biased towards animate life, so move like a fish would move. I've got a friend, Simon Thacker, who does ancestral movement. I've learned a lot from him as well. Move like a fish would move because a part of your DNA is used to doing that. Move like a lizard for a while. Get down on all fours and scurry about and make out you're climbing or flying, because our body actually loves all that stuff. And I feel like that's another aspect of a sort of a deep ecology in practice that can help us to be who we are, help us to be more human again.
Yeah, when we wrote Thinking Like a Mountain towards the Council of All Beings in 1988, Joanna Macy and myself and Arne Naess and Pat Fleming, we included what we then called evolutionary remembering, which was exactly what you said, of just crawling around like lizards and recapitulating our evolutionary journey by movement.
Fantastic.
So,
There it is once
yeah,
again.
and the text of that book, by the way, is available online, and I'll send you a link if you
Thank you.
want to put it on the show notes.
I will, and I'll add a link to that and to whatever else you're up to at the moment, because I myself have not read that, which just goes to show exactly what you were saying before, that a lot of these practices are actually just spontaneous. We're just rediscovering something that's so innate.
Exactly.
You also mentioned a great phrase there of Thomas's work, the great flaring forth, a really, really beautiful way of talking about the way the universe comes into existence. My PhD was on light. I'm fascinated by light and the way we read it, the way we interpret light as a symbol. And I guess without really realizing what I was doing, what I set out to do in that project was to try to understand like consciousness, the way that we react to light in terms of consciousness, in a way that keeps us bedded into the earth. Like, I had a real problem with that sort of fundamentalist Christian idea of light being in heaven somewhere else, of God being separate. And it always sang to me better to read the indigenous mythologies, where we rise up out of the earth. We're not put here from somewhere else. And so I felt like, is there a way that we can get back in touch with that deep ecological being of being here as animals, as self-aware primates, and having that beautiful symbol of consciousness and spirit and life force, all of it integrated into one web? I feel like I'm only just getting it now. That was, the PhD was 10 or 12 years ago, but I do feel like there's no reason we can't have all of those things. Like, we are that. We are lit from within. Consciousness is a light. Like, that's not just a metaphor. We can see that now in the imaging of the way the brain works. We literally become aware with light of the fact that we're here.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. You talked a bit about getting, well, while you were talking about what you did following on from your earlier work with Joanna and Thomas, it sounded to me a little bit as well like something that Indigenous elders are saying to, for instance, non-Aboriginal people in Australia, is you really need to get your story back. You need to get that story back that links you back to nature. As you said, don't just come and take our story, learn from it and respect it, great. But you actually need to get your own story back. And it sounds to me like over decades, what you've been doing is getting your own story back, is finding your own way back. And in some ways finding it easier than you would have expected, even though we're working against the tide in terms of, modern civilization.
And perhaps to take it off on a slight tangent, I feel like I keep trying to find a way to take that spiritual experience of these rituals and ceremonies and the spiritual experience of reconnection and to move it back into the atmosphere, into the activist realm. So most recently, I've been working on a project in Ecuador where we've been working on rainforests in Ecuador for more than 30 years at the Rainforest Information Centre.
Sorry, John,
one of those. Sorry?
No, your mic was just fading out there. You've come back now.
One of those projects was a biological reserve called Los Cedros, which we helped to create. We were able to get funding from the Australian government in the late 80s, and we've been protecting it ever since, from one form of disaster to the next. Most recently, the mining industry got a foothold through a corrupt government decision that allowed mining in previously inaccessible natural areas called bosques protectores, protected forests. And for 4 years, we've been fighting lawsuits to try and get the miners out. And that finally reached the Supreme Court of Ecuador last year, which is the constitutional court. And Ecuador's constitution is quite revolutionary in that it was the first in the world to include the rights of nature.
Ah, yes.
And so we launched a case to eject the miners from Los Cedros based upon the rights of nature. And for the first time, the Constitutional Court ruled, gave teeth to that clause in the Constitution and ruled in our favour. So the miners had to leave, and a precedent was set. Our director, the director of the Rainforest Information Centre, Liz Downs, is currently in Ecuador looking to see whether there are other communities trying to protect their bosques protectores from mining, that we can help to support them in legal actions based upon the precedent that's been set. Right. So in a way that grew out, that the idea of the rights of nature grew from the Council of All Beings, from the different creatures saying, what about us? We're Australians too, who speaks for us, and we have rights.
Yeah.
And so, just the ability to translate that into legalese in Ecuador, I don't know. I just sort of, it all came through me, I didn't create it, I was just there and I saw it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, it's really nice. We have to celebrate, right? We have to celebrate any victory we have. That's great to hear. Well, thanks, John. I guess I would like to just come back to one thing we've said as we work towards the end of this conversation. And you talked about your work with Joanna Macy, moving towards honoring our pain for the world. And really, in a sense, just because I feel like this is something people are going to have to really start to deal with, right? No matter what happens and no matter what victories we might have in terms of, protecting the earth from extractive industries and climate chaos, we're in for some pretty unstable times. And I feel like people are waking up to it and they're seeing it with a mixture of trepidation and sometimes grief. So for me, actually being able to work with people waking up to the terrible situation we're in terms of ecosystem breakdown, a part of it is, how do we deal with the pain of people waking up to this? And so it was really quite consoling for me to hear you talk about honoring pain being something that leads you back to love and inspiration and so on and so forth.
And more than that, I think that it's a necessary precondition to be able to authentically celebrate. That any celebration of any victory, any celebration of the universe, that Thomas Berry and Sister Miriam call for, in their work, that doesn't first honour the pain of this incarnation of the human caught in this horrendous machine, sliding inexorably, it seems, to oblivion. It's going to be hollow, and But once we have shared with each other our deepest anguish about what we see, and once we've realised that everybody, when they're invited, sees exactly the same thing as that we've been seeing, and we've felt like it's some kind of a personal thing and there's nothing personal about it, then the celebration knows no bounds.
Fantastic.
And so, I feel like there's two things. One is that learning how to do this, perhaps through your therapy groups, but certainly I know through the Deep Ecology workshops that I facilitate and many other people facilitate, is a really important step. Once we know how to do this, we can organise such circles for ourselves.
Yeah.
And anybody who'd be interested to be on a mailing list to hear about Deep Ecology workshops happening in their neck of the woods should email me. You can put my email on your on your podcast, or people can just Google it, and then I'll send you notices about anything happening where you live. But also this year, 6 other facilitators of the work that reconnects, Joanna's work that reconnects, 6 other facilitators and I have started designing Zoom courses. So far they've been 6 2-hour sessions over 6 weeks with some homework in between, And the feedback that we're getting is that we're definitely moving in a direction that works for people,
Great.
And so that if you're not in an area, like I'm no longer traveling around the world doing this stuff, but if you get in touch, I'll let you know whenever any of these Zoom courses are happening.
Yeah, that's great to know. Like most of the ecotherapy certificate course I'm running now is online. I pretty much commit to time on country with people. I think that's really important. But spreading this work online, it's doable, and it adds something, and it makes it accessible. It's really important. And I think that combination, that space around that kind of, the community ecotherapy stuff that I'm trying to work with, the deep ecology type workshops that you're working with, they just all seem to be leading towards that space of, well, some people would call deep adaptation. Like, how do we be here authentically now at this time, and retain all the parts of our psyche, and sometimes bring some of those back online, if you like, and feel more whole. So thank you so much, John. That's really great to hear. I'll definitely put those links up and invite people to get in touch. And I'd love to stay in touch too. I'm just so excited that you feel like you've got this energy back and you're bringing this work back around to whatever way you can get it out there. I honor you for that effort. I'm really thankful.
Well, thanks for your work, Geoff, and thanks for inviting me on.
Great stuff. All right, John Seed, thank you very much. We'll leave the links in the description of this video, everyone, for you to follow up, and hopefully you can. Thanks for watching, and please consider liking this video. And if you want more content like this, subscribe, and the nature calling bell will toll for you. This is Geoff signing off.